Welcome to JCAT, a program that seeks to introduce Japanese, contextualized literature and ideas for use by missionaries and anyone that seeks to share the gospel with Japanese people.
日本人から聞く日本のキリスト教。
Okay, welcome back. This is John here with my friend Kohei. The Christian population number is like, I think that if you go by, I think that it's something like 0.75% Protestant, 0.75% Catholic. So together you've got about 1.5 or so percent. But that's like I think that's people enrolled in churches that are recognized by the government. So, house churches wouldn't be included. On the other hand, there's probably people on membership rolls that are not going to church. So
I mean, there are people who doesn't go to church, but they're actually believers as well.
Right.
So,
Yeah. But I mean, like Maki has a ladies' Bible study now, because Rhea goes to a Christian Yochien. But most of the moms are not Christians, but a few are. So there got to be talk around, and now there's I think 5 or 6 of them meeting twice a month, and more of them are Christians, but not all of them are. But it's like, I'm a Christian, but the church I grew up in is in downtown, and my husband and my kids don't want to go downtown every Sunday. So I'm technically like, that's my church. So I can't even find a local church because that's my church. It's too close to leave, but too far to go. And then almost all the cases, the husbands are not believers. So they just don't want to be like Meiwaku to their husbands on Sunday morning to either make them babysit or drag them to church where they don't want to go. So they meet at our house twice a month, and they have fellowship, and they talk and they read the Bible and stuff like that. So that's been cool, but like a lot of them, they wouldn't necessarily be counted in that 1% because not all of them are on the rolls of official churches.
So like I like, so like one of the things also, I don't know what's the first day, but like, one of the speaker really challenge, and I think he's not the only one these days, but we really need to think, what is church, and what is who is pastor, and there's so many, we define that by, people don't want to admit it, but it's not really by biblical basis, but it's actually by tradition, how the church is today, how the pastor's role is in, and I think this is a critical time. I think, at least what the Bible means by, pastor or church, the context is so different today that even the same word that we use is so different from, or sometimes far from, and I'm not want to unnecessarily bring controversy in, but, and if it's, I think as long as God's will be done through whatever it is, I think, I don't think you don't need to challenge that. So I'm not necessarily challenging to change everything, what we do today. But then if the tradition is hindering, the big purpose of God, then we need to be critically think, is this really important to keep? I don't want to give it too specific because I'm sure, I know.
Right. Then it can be like,
I
hey,
really
you're talking about
think
my
it is a
church.
time. Yeah, it is a time to think,
Yeah.
whether it's in America or Japan, I feel, or any part of the world, we really need to critically think, what is church, really?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine in Japan, if the church grows in the next few decades,
Mhm.
I think it will be more likely grassroots, Christians that it's not I don't think it'll be as much like, the Christians in this building and the Christians in this building and the Christians in this building, and this is a list of this denomination's Christians and this denomination's Christians. I think that it'll be more like, I just imagine more like that ladies' Bible study where like two or three of them technically belong to this church, and then maybe two or three of them don't because it's just their life situation. But they're meeting and they're sharing, and little by little they're even reaching out to some of the other moms in the preschool. And it's like, yeah. And then, the lady who's serious about going to her church locally often says, "Hey, my church has a children's program to the other ladies. So if you want to come to this, Matsuri or whatever at my church, then they'll go check it out." Because a lot of them don't have allegiances locally and don't feel like they can really step in anywhere right now. So they step in when they can. But I think I just sort of suspect that kind of like be as committed as possible for Japanese Christians may not mean the same thing that it maybe meant like when I was growing up, and it was like very important to be at church every Sunday, at Sunday school whenever you can. I mean, I went to Bible college, and we were required to go to two Sunday services a week and three chapels a week. And we could get suspended if we didn't. Um, I don't suspect that's the future of the church in Japan, that kind of structure. Where I mean, I guess I could see like that continuing, but not necessarily growing and being like the face of Christianity in Japan. But I don't know. That's just kind of a guess if I were to think about it, moving forward.
Yeah, so like I don't want to, yeah, if that's working, I think hallelujah, right? If that model,
Yeah.
but if it's not, then I think, and this is hard. Like Japanese tendencies, we like tradition.
Hmm.
So once a tradition is set, it's hard to break it, right?
Mm.
And and sometimes some tradition become a keigaika, like what do you call it? It's, I don't know, keigaika in English.
I don't know.
It's like,
Okay,
just
Kai.
become just tradition, but it's losing the essence of, what it was before.
Oh, it's just kind of uh, becoming becoming less meaningful
Yeah.
repetitions or
Yeah.
something.
So, if the tradition is wonderful, like I'm not gonna unnecessarily challenge it. I shouldn't be, right? But and I think if God's work, and I think God can work from anything, right? In any lack of, I guess, our, I don't know,
Yeah.
ignorance sometimes.
Yeah.
Even that God can work through. I believe that, but then I think God at the same time, you know, God give us a privilege to be part of His wonderful work.
Yeah.
Uh, I think if that's not God's leading towards that way, um, we cannot be so like adamant about stick to the model that's maybe it's not biblical ones. It's more about
Yeah,
it's hard
it's
to
it's
say this because
cultural and
it's some
it's
some of the Western tradition is more over 1700 years, right?
mm,
So
hmm. Yeah,
like
I mean,
who are you to challenge that? But then
right.
it doesn't. But then when you read the Bible, that's a early church, like first century Christians, context, you
Yeah.
know, so
Well,
different,
and
right?
I think that a lot of the church uh traditions that are from the West are from largely from the time, like from Christendom, meaning when the emperor was
Yeah,
a Christian and the head of the church.
yeah,
So what we read in the New Testament is when the church was persecuted and minority, and in some ways, though the Church of Japan is not persecuted, that's closer, I think, than the idea that Christendom is both like propped up by Christianity and defines Christianity in a kind of weird symbiotic way, that people could critique from time to time. But I don't think that's the the model for Japan. Though I think that a lot of people that enjoy their churches, like their traditional churches, I think there's a lot of people that enjoy the ceremony and stuff. It's just that not everybody has that option, you know.
But again, I'm not necessarily the goal is to go back to first century, but then I think, I mean, this is currently learning a lot, it's like how it looks like the big first century, the gathering at least it was in the house. And again, I don't want to misunderstand me. Like I'm not the person, a cell group person or house church person or
Mm-hmm.
movement, anything by any mean that ways. But then at least, but then when you look at the first century, it was meeting at the house, right? And a maximum was 75, I heard, because that's the
Mm-hmm.
biggest house that they can hold, which,
Mm-hmm.
we can imagine that, obviously.
Yeah.
And so like even that fact, like, many people come to Japan like, oh, the church is so small, it's average 30 people group. Well, that's how
Yeah.
the gathering
Right.
looked like in the first century. Like, why you have this mega church mentality that house had to be big, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that I feel like Japanese can at least feel like relate to how it was in back then, and then always gathering was around the meal. You know,
Yeah.
it
Yeah. Yeah.
wasn't this, I don't know,
Yeah,
well
kind of a
developed program.
liturgical service.
Yeah, and that
Well,
yeah.
I mean, I think the thing that's hard for me is that a traditional church on a Western model that is the model that, let's say, most missionaries brought post World War II is
Mhm.
essentially churches that look like churches in America. The thing is, very few churches in America are functional with 20 people because you don't tithe enough to pay a pastor in a building
Yeah.
at 20 people, right? So in Japan, that model, just the pay a pastor and pay a building model, is unsustainable for the majority of probably evangelical churches. The
Exactly.
oldest ones, when the missionaries worked there, paid off the building before they hired a pastor because they were on missionary salaries, right? So a lot of established churches have the luxury of not paying a building, paying a minimal pastor's salary, and being able to be a functional traditional church until they have to do building renovations, because then there's a building cost again. So that's like, I guess, the best case scenarios, but that's not really like an a strategy to grow new churches, because then you've got to do the whole thing over again where you find a building. And I mean, I know a lot of people do that, but I feel like fewer people do it successfully than, like, when I first got to Japan, like '07. I feel like the generation of missionaries before me were still finishing those projects more than I hear about them starting and finishing them in that similar style today. So yeah, something leaner, something with less costs attached, feels like it fits these smaller congregations better.
And I think that going back to 99% concept, right? Like, if we're gonna raise a leader, right? Like, I think one of the model we know is send it to the seminary, right? But
Yeah.
you know, is that seminary role to raise a leaders in locally, or is it actually is the church the congregation's role to raise a leader,
Oh, yeah.
and so, and that's how it was, right? And it's like I mean the Paul and Timothy was going around, and but then they raise the elders and overseers in each places, and
Mm,
how the churches also look like was also when we read the book of Ephesians and Philippians, whatever it's not was sent to one gathering, like it was
mm.
in the whole church network
Yeah, like they
in
passed
the
the letter
the
on
city,
to
right? And
the
that was passed
yeah.
around. And
Mm-hmm.
today, do we have that network? And which is actually
Right.
another topic, big topic, but you know, but we
Yeah.
have a model of like one church become an individual, entity, and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, or maybe at best, we have a only network within your own denomination.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
do we have a network with other church if it's beyond our denomination?
Yeah.
Which is cool about, I think, it's Asian Access. I like, because we have so much, it's totally interdenominational,
Mm. Oh, yeah, yeah.
connection, right?
Right.
But anyway, apart from that, like I think first century, it was, the gathering was around everywhere in the community, and they were having a network, and that was the church, right? So
Yeah.
I
Yeah, I've
mean,
actually heard of city networks in Japan, like I heard that Machida
Mhm.
in Tokyo, like South Tokyo, has a good pastors network,
Mhm.
and that may be why Machida actually now is kind of influential in Crash Japan.
Oh,
Like
really?
Crash Japan was turned over to Japanese leadership at some point.
Mm.
And a few of the leaders now, I think, are pastors in Machida, and
Oh,
I
wow.
kind of think it's related to Machida pastors having just a good like loose network where they're friends with each other. They like meet the pastors of Machida churches meet interdenominationally. I heard Kolgane actually does that too. Like the
Where?
pastors of Kolgane where your
Oh.
mom
Mhm.
lives. Yeah. One of the ladies who does Bible study upstairs, not now, but upstairs in my house with my wife and their friends, goes to one of the churches in Kogane. And it seems like the pastors in Kogane also network, which I think would
Actually,
be cool. Like all cities start to do
Yamagata,
that.
Yamagata City is really having that tradition, which is great too. There's
Yeah.
interdenominational pastors meeting. Um, and I think the Miyagi Otomo Sensei has created that network even before 311.
Mm.
So that's when they actually 311 happens, that network already functioned together well and cooperating together and stuff like that.
Yeah, and
Uh,
Iwate, maybe because of
yeah,
311,
that was disaster
also,
path. Yeah.
yeah, seems like that's improved, right? So that seems like a good trend to see.
And the JC7, was one of the topic was that, right? Like,
Mm.
networking, and, Kodaira Sensei is the one that's a really, become Jiko Incho, but he mentioned about that in Fukuoka conference as well. But, he really feel the importance of networking, not just interdenominationally, but like interculturally,
Mm.
that's why they invited the Vietnamese congregation, the group and stuff like that. And
Oh,
sometimes we are not, Christians everywhere in Japan, and Japanese population decreasing, but the foreigners increasing in Japan.
mm.
So, and there's many Christians in Japan actually that but necessarily not connected, so,
Right.
and how important it is to, like, I think many Japanese realize that we can't do this by one pastors or one denomination.
Yeah.
The key is to we do it, cooperate together, 一緒に, 選挙協力, and yeah, like, I mean, simply, if I want to use a word, like, I really always think about John 13, 34, and 35, who love one another,
Mm.
the world will know that you're my disciple, right? So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, and it's so famous, but like, I really think if we believe that we are part of the Lord's church as a whole, your brother and my, you're my brother and sisters, whether you are coming from different denomination or different culture, right?
Yeah.
And I think the world, I mean, today is biggest probably challenge, right? That, you know, maybe it's not just today, maybe, but like Christians fighting each other is probably the worst witness to the world, I
Yeah,
feel.
yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or just acting
Mhm.
in non-Christian ways, right? Or being concerned about non-Christian things
Mhm.
more than Christian things, or yeah, any number of things. Okay, so I wanted to get to some of these questions.
Mhm.
It looks like I have notes on 4 questions. And so
Mhm.
these were questions I think submitted by missionaries like you and I, for example. I think maybe we mentioned both of us had questions that were actually picked for this. And it was questions were answered by the pastors in the cohort.
Mhm.
So pastors across
Mhm.
Japan and across denominations. I think mostly evangelical, but all Protestant pastors.
Mhm.
So the first question, and if you remember, because I think I was translating in my head as I was writing, so my writing could be weird. Um, the first question was, what is one thing that you want missionaries to do more? They asked
Mhm.
this cohort of pastors.
Mhm.
The first guy said kankei,
Mhm.
which I think he was talking about building relationships with non-believers. Um,
Mhm.
so I think that means, like we talked about earlier, as opposed to the sort of quick evangelism, more of a
Mhm.
relationship based stuff. Another answer was understand Japanese culture and have the same heart, which um, I think they meant sort of trying to operate from more of a Japanese posture. The
Or
next,
trying to understand, I guess, right? Trying to understand.
yeah, like the next person said same, and then the example was like specifically Texans, but all Americans in general tend to have pride, be independent, and hate being told what to do. Um, I may have written that down less kind because I was quickly trying to work, and I was sitting next to a guy from Texas, so maybe I made sure to write down that part. Um, yeah. So, and then the last one said missionaries can do stuff pastors can't, and they want missionaries to jump into ministry with abandon, I guess, which I'm not sure how I translated that or what I translated that from because I don't know how to say that in Japanese. Uh, the second question was um what one thing should missionaries stop doing? Do you remember any of the answers? I mean, if you didn't write notes, I wouldn't expect. It's
Yeah, I
been
was
about
on
a
the
week.
stage, so but
Oh,
I
you
think
were probably
I think
translating.
yeah, I remember. I think don't. The question is to want to stop, but was
Yeah,
it
like what should missionaries stop doing?
to? I'm not sure that was the question, but I remember one pastor was saying, "Do not stop communicating."
That's the first, yeah.
But maybe that's the first one, first
That's
question.
no, that's the first answer that I have.
Oh, okay, yeah.
It says not battle.
Mm.
So I don't know if that means don't battle with pastors, and then slash don't stop communicating with pastors.
Mhm.
So keep communicating with pastors continuously.
Mhm.
There was a mugicha or water example, I think, where
Oh,
maybe the missionaries were
it's understanding
adamant.
the Japanese culture, I think.
Yeah, they were adamant that at a children's program they needed to provide water for an outing, and the Japanese staff was adamant that we're going to provide mugicha, and they were kind of like, just drop it. Like this isn't like why are we fighting over this? But essentially, the missionaries would have to drop it because we're in Japan, so don't. We might
Don't
say,
see it from your perspective. I think that's the
yeah,
point.
choose your battles. Maybe don't like, yeah, don't die on the water or Mugicha Hill. Maybe don't specifically don't force outside culture on Japan.
Yeah.
Understand Japanese cultural realities. Uh, Another person said same. Rest when pastors are resting. Or and rest enough to be a model so that the pastors can be like, well, the missionary is resting this much, so I have a right to rest this much as well. Because
I think the way the pastor was saying is like more show us a good example of rest because
okay,
I mean Japanese tend to overwork and pastors tend to overwork. So you'd be a good example for us or something so that the pastor can also, makes easy for us to rest kind of thing.
yeah, then they
That's how
can
it said.
say, yeah, they can point in a sense in their own minds when they condemn themselves for working too hard or not working hard enough. They can say, well, the missionaries are resting. They're resting on Monday. Maybe I should too, or something. This is something like that.
It's a side note from my little bit, this is not what they talk about, but I think it's a little challenging for younger generation because I think older generation has working mentality.
Hmm.
Um, and but then yeah, I don't want to say too much, but like I think younger sometimes not necessarily exact same. Like, I think many things were written in a way that make sure you don't overwork, but then depends on what generation you're talking about. Maybe
Yeah,
they need to
there's
encourage to work more, so
maybe there's definitely younger. I mean, my age are. I think you're not that much older than me. We're close, but guys, for sure, guys that I know that are between you and I in age. That means in their 40s. Um, that like for example, don't drink at Nomikai. You know, they have, and it's not religious. They just don't like getting drunk with their coworkers and just don't like getting drunk, So they like, I'm gonna drink udoncha, not, not beer. And I feel like just a little bit ago, Kohai would not have the um like ability to do that, right? If the senpai, if the culture was like everybody's doing this together, then
mm,
the Kohai wouldn't have the employee wouldn't have the um ability to make personal decisions outside of a group. So it does seem like younger meaning 40s and under people are more like they think more and they make more personal decisions. Maybe it's specifically things that they don't believe are going to harm the group, just they can be this much individual on the spectrum without going too far. But that's still different from older generations, I think. Um, yeah, okay. Well, question 3 was, let's see, as missionaries working with overworking pastor, how do you encourage pastor to rest without being intrusive? Um, what is this guy? The first answer says prepare money and do all their work. I think it was
that's
like,
that we're
I
jokingly
think it was a joke. Yeah, because I have in parentheses get serious. So I think it was like, yeah, we can stop working if you pay us and do all the work for us, then we can stop working. But I think the more serious answer, somebody said, which of your responsibilities can I take so you can take a vacation? Um, if there is a good trust relationship, this is possible. If there's not a good trust relationship, then maybe there's going to be cynicism or um like the idea, oh, are you actually judging me? Are you actually, telling me what to do?
Mhm,
So having a very good trust relationship between the pastor and missionary has
mhm,
to happen before this kind of
mhm,
thing can happen. Uh, one pastor said that the pastors need to take 3 to 4 weeks break at a time because they don't know how to take a real break. So they might, if they take a short break, they're not really shutting off. That was one
I
answer.
think one of the pastor was saying like, really Japanese in general, we don't know how to rest. Like even when we take a vacation, we fill up the schedule,
Oh,
and when we come back from vacation, we still need a rest from the vacation kind of way of
yeah,
taking a vacation, where, I think it was a ladies pastor, but she has experience in Australia. She realized, they really rest in the vacation. They just lay on the beach and kind
yeah,
of, so like kind of like, yeah, humbly they saying we need to learn from you guys how to rest kind of
how to
things.
rest. Yeah. Yeah, that seemed to be a kind of recurring theme.
Yeah.
How what something that pastors can learn from missionaries,
Mhm.
from the Japanese pastors saying that. And, but yeah, yeah, so that was good. And I don't know, oh, this might have been your question. Japanese churches, what is one Western element of Western churches in Japan that needs to end?
Yeah,
I
that's
think,
exact the topic that we just talked about.
yeah, we just talked about that a
But I
bit.
mean, I don't know
So,
how I forgot what how the pastor. I was like, they are so.
um,
I mean, actually, I don't know you remember, but all the pastors are very, very polite.
oh yeah,
They want to make sure that every time we answer that and ask that kind of challenging question, we appreciate you guys, missionaries.
right,
I want
right.
you to understand we
Yeah,
appreciate
yeah.
you guys.
Yeah, no, they were
So that's
very,
always a disclaimer, So
mhm,
I mean,
mhm.
but I thought, I mean, I love how they said it still, though, because I mean, maybe I don't know, it's straight enough for the non, really low context culture. I don't know they understand, what they're saying, but from my perspective, I like the way how they softly bring, you know, and I almost that's the only actually the part I remember more, like they just make sure we appreciate you guys, being here and missionaries, and over and over, um, before they answer the question,
Yeah, yeah. Um, right. So the answers
Yeah,
were
I don't
always
actually I don't
always
remember how they answered
started
it.
with appreciation. One person said something to the effect of keeping structure. This is very abstract, and I think the answers get more concrete. But keeping some structure and breaking some structure so that you can have new structure that fits better. So I think like some of the things that they're talking about here is um that just like parts of Japanese life don't show up in Western life. And the example was the train suicide culture.
Oh yeah,
Like in Japan, if you're using a busy train line, you could be like, "Oh, my train's late because Jinshinjuku." I'm
yeah.
saying it wrong.
No,
Uh,
Jishinjiko. Yeah, you're right.
oh, I'm saying it right. Good. But in the States, like it's not like, oh, there's traffic on the 5 because somebody jumped in front of a car. I mean, there's traffic for other reasons, but the frequency of like public suicide in a sense in Japan is it's a Japanese affair.
No,
And it
phenomenon. Yeah.
it would need to be thought about from a Japanese perspective, not a Western like I feel like Western churches or Western missionaries bring in often we offer solutions, stuff we don't maybe really understand. Because I think Western this is a critique. I think Western Christianity is sort of addicted to having answers. And often we give answers to stuff we don't understand, whether it's Western stuff or Japanese stuff. So I think what they're saying is that the Japanese churches maybe need to be able to look at their own society and the issues that are specific to Japanese society. That this example of train suicide
I think
being
also that example that I think mentioned about was tea ceremony, sado, so
yeah, yeah,
yeah, so
that
like
comes up. Yeah.
I think, I mean, how I interpret it, I guess, is, like trying to find the Christian influence in Japanese culture,
Mhm.
rather than, bringing Western
Yeah.
things to influence Japanese culture. Really understanding Sado, where that come from, how that come from, have a more appreciation of,
Yeah.
like Sado is a lot of about also courtesies and
Right.
Deigi, but many of them are like, the Sennorikyu, like some Christian influence, that Naro is a gay kind of things, and
Uh-huh.
taking of the sword when they get in and into this peaceful place and stuff like that. I
Right.
I think, I mean, that probably the point is to really, again, understand the culture, and what really speak more into Japanese, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I think with the Sado, the tea ceremony example, you have something that speaks to Japanese people. Like
Mm-hmm.
I think that, you could boil it down to Sado is very it's very honoring. The person performing the ceremony is very honoring the person that's sort of like receiving the ceremony. And that's very Christian. I mean, that's like Jesus washing feet
Mm-hmm.
in another context. No one would do that today because it's just the context. But if you did the tea ceremony for someone the way that it's meant to be done, you would be very much um honoring that person, and they would feel it, right? Because that's how Japanese that's something that would really work specifically for Japanese people, I think. I mean, if someone did Sado for me, I would appreciate it just because you can tell it's so obviously um deferential and kind. But even more so, I think, for Japanese people. Um, yeah, you're right. That was one of the things. What is it? The Odegi Tadashi.
Yeah.
High ritual speaks to Japanese. Um, People like Western stuff, perhaps focusing on this reaches Japanese, but people feel Japanese stuff. So yeah, maybe the experience, maybe Japanese value experience, religious experience more than a typical Western Protestant might. I mean, there are Protestants, Western Protestants that value experience, but maybe Japanese would value experience more than Westerners in religion.
Actually, now,
Um,
now a little bit reminded, like how one of the I think Ami Sensei also created, like, his starting point. I mean, going back to the previous question a little bit, but related to what we're talking now, like his starting point is we are different,
mhm,
culturally.
mhm,
So starting point, he always start off that assuming that we don't understand each other.
mhm.
So, you know, that's why he doesn't want us to, the missionaries to stop communicating,
Oh yeah,
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 and
yeah,
so, and like if we are already different, like if you don't communicate, obviously, and even we communicate, we still don't misunderstand each other, obviously, but you know, that's why continuously communicate,
yeah,
and I think the goal of trying to understand, we may not agree, right? And I don't think, like from my experience in being in the United States for so long, I'm try my best to understand American, and where I was, there was many Chinese, so I tried to understand Chinese or Chinese American, but I came to the point I cannot be them,
yeah, yeah,
like no matter what. But like I think it's important is trying to understand, I can never completely sometimes agree or completely gets it, even being in the US for 20 years, have a command in language, and even asking lots of questions, I still, okay, that's how you think, I still don't get
yeah.
it, but okay, at
Right.
least
Yeah, yeah,
I try my best to, but of course, I'm at the core, and I'm Japanese, so I don't think we can completely understand or agree to certain things, but I believe if your goal is to understand other person's perspective, even we cannot be completely agree, I think is a key. Then, you know, if we're giving up about, trying to understand or or your goal is to agree, which is
Uh-huh.
impossible, because we're
Yeah.
coming from such a different background, right? So,
Yeah.
and or then you become judging each other, or it's hard to work together. But I think,
Yeah.
but then there's somehow God's, again, this is to me is like a almost mystery to me, but like I think that's where I feel God's power is really evident. Like, when two different people from
Oh
different
yeah. It's
parts of
kind
the
of a
world work together as a brother and sister in Christ is like, I think it's a miracle actually by itself.
Yep. All right, thanks, and talk to you again.
Oh, by the way, you don't have to record this, or you don't have to,
Okay.
but that was one of the